Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Ms. Dominguez?
Present.
Okay.
All right, we're going to be jumping around just a little bit, but I'll try to guide us through as carefully as possible. But before we do that, we'll, on the administration's recommendation, we are pulling from tonight's agenda items 3, O, P, and Q, with the intention being that we'll take those items back up at a later date after the legislature finishes its work. The next item we're going to take up is actually agenda item 1D. The ones we're going to take up first are going to be handled by Mr. Porter, and he's taking, and he's going to guide us through agenda item 1D. Is that right, Mr. Porter?
Yes, sir.
All right, so that is policy, it's a recommendation to adopt a new policy coded JDG, which is the Code of Online Conduct.
Good afternoon, Superintendent and board members. So our online code of conduct has been put in place to support our virtual learning model that we now have in the school district.
All right. Any members have any questions about the proposed new policy? If there's no questions, I will take a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation.
I'll make that motion to adopt.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons,
I'll second.
seconded by Mrs. Abrams. Is there any public input? Hearing no public input, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open.
Something said abstain. I didn't touch a thing.
Okay, you can change it.
Okay.
Order, you got this came from forethought with the new law that was
Wasn't
reflected
anything on my
upon,
screen. It just said I did.
we had to do this,
Did it on
It said I just did it, but just
some
said-
ghost working.
a lot.
You did it.
No.
Mr. Dominguez, you had a question?
Cindy, I need to rescind that.
Okay, you can change it.
Okay.
It's gonna be a lot to enforce.
Yeah.
Can you bring it up for me again?
While Mr. Porter, while he's working on that, so we don't intend to
Oh, so let me get back to here.
punish any student who happens to have a BB gun in his bedroom in the back of the screen.
Background.
Nothing like that, are we?
No, sir, that's not the plan.
Gotcha.
What was that, Mr. Duncan? I couldn't hear.
That student that was in Jefferson Parish, I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
that got in trouble,
BB gun.
had a BB gun in his room.
Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next one from Mr. Porter
Doctor,
is,
before we move on,
yes, sir.
okay, I apologize for stepping out when you started, but the first three items under adoption, what,
We haven't gotten to those yet.
We skipped that.
We're skipping down to accommodate Mr.
All right,
Porter, so
okay.
the only one we've done is the
Is it-
Code of Online Conduct.
okay,
And then we're going to skip again to Agenda 2B, which is to consider approval to delete policy JCD, which is the old student conduct policy. Mr. Porter?
Yes, sir. So the rationale is to update and create a culture and climate policy to reflect the work that we're doing now with our CCCI document. So this language has been kind of antiquated since we revamped our discipline policies to go from more of a punitive model to a more restorative model. So we're going to develop a culture and climate document to replace the student conduct.
Any board members have any questions about the proposal to delete that policy?
okay, so we're speaking of deleting one, and you guys are already in the process of developing the new policy,
Yes, sir.
all right? Okay, and the reason we're deleting it now is because we have time to get the new policy in place before.
Yeah, as we're doing the work of the CCEI work that we're doing, the goal is to have alignment with all of our policies to that particular document. And the language in this policy is kind of more reflective of the old discipline policy where we had the step procedures in place, but now we have more of a restorative model in place, and we want to be able to reflect that to support the overall culture and climate of the schools.
And we actually adopted the new version of the Student Code of Conduct in August of last year.
That is correct.
And we just never went back and deleted
Yeah.
this old one. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think in the new one that we're voting a little further down actually has some of this one. The better parts of this one were basically moved to the other one, it appears.
Right.
I don't know what happened to all the other words. Hopefully they're, like you said, they're going to be in something different. But a lot of what was in here is moving to that other one.
Yeah, so what will happen is that in the culture and climate policy that we're going to develop, it's going to really tell the story of the why with the shifts that we're making. It's going to give the why behind our change.
And when Dr. Hurst and Mr. Porter and I met about these, we felt like it was kind of, you have student conduct here, and you've got code of conduct. It just seemed like a lot of the words were, what happened, this is an older policy, and then we had the newer one, and then, then we'll have a culture piece. So it just seemed like this wasn't appropriate anymore. So that's why we have a recommendation to delete.
Okay.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation and delete that policy?
I'll make the motion.
Motion is made by Mr. Bush. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Dominguez. Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Online voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Last one from Mr. Porter will be agenda item 3N, which is to consider approval of those revisions to policy JCDA, the Student Code of Conduct. Mr. Porter?
Yes, sir. So again, the changes that have been made have been reflective of the language that we wanted to include that does align with what we're going with restorative. And I can go through these, it's not very many, just on a couple pages. The first one, orientation. Students shall be informed by school authorities that violations of board policy and school rules or regulations may result in a range of disciplinary actions. Each school shall plan and conduct an orientation and other meetings within the first 5 days of school each year to fully inform all employees and students of the Student Code of Conduct, bullying, reporting procedures and process, the Student Assistance Team, which is our SAT process, restorative meeting process, mental health supports, positive behavior support, PBIS plan. The Student Code of Conduct should be reviewed quarterly with all students and staff. A copy of the Student Code of Conduct will be posted online. A parent may request a copy of the policy from any school building or the district office. With respect to compliance, each student in grades 4 through 12, each parent or guardian of a student in grades 4 through 12 by virtue of attending school in the Tangipahoa Parish School System agrees to compliance. For students, the statement of compliance shall state that the student agrees to attend school regularly, arrive at school on time, demonstrate significant effort toward completion of homework assignments, and follow school and classroom rules. For parents, the statement of compliance shall state that the parent or legal guardian agrees to ensure his or her child completes all assigned homework and attend all required parent-teacher principal conferences. New students entering the Tangipahoa Parish School System or students returning to in-person learning will be given orientation on the Student Code of Conduct. Orientation will be provided by school-level administrators or designee. The principal shall ensure that all students have completed the orientation process prior to beginning classes.
I'd like to add here, if I can, that the policy we just deleted has the orientation and the compliance stuff, which is what we wanted to just take and include in this one, because we want to make sure that we provide notice and orientation for our employees and our students, prior. to any kind of expectation to follow the rules. And then we also want students and parents to initial that they have received a copy of or they have access, or they know where to find, or they have a copy of the Code of Conduct for Students. So that's basically taken from this one we just deleted and added into this policy here.
So that was one of the questions I had, because I'm trying to find it, but it seems like when I read this, we were saying that we weren't going to make them sign something saying that they got it, but that if by attending the school, that they're, automatically are agreeing that they're going to be in compliance. Is that, are we going to have them do anything that requires them to signify that they received a copy, or that they are going to do these things like we put in here under the compliance?
Yeah, so in the past, the district would print the hard copies of the Code of Conduct handbook, but that has since changed. Our plan is to have some on hand at individual schools if a parent requests one, but the goal is to make sure that parents are aware. Students in the first days of school will go through the orientation process, and we're going to provide the document from our departments of schools to make sure they cover the information with the students and faculty and staff, but to make parents aware where the document is and how they can access it.
I'm sorry, can I add something also? So under the old, what we used to do was we would do the hard copy handbooks, and there was a page there that parents had to cut out and sign and send back. Yes.
And we would never get half of them back.
Yes. So what we're going to do, I remember now after we started talking about this, it's been a few weeks since we met on this, but what we'll do is we'll make sure that we email this to every student, every parent. We'll send it out in our Connect newsletter that goes to parents through social media. It'll be we'll have it on our website front center. And we'll make sure that we communicate out to families that it's available to look in addition to the orientation.
So and obviously this doesn't need to be in the policy, but this is another one of those crazy Brett Duncan ideas. But thinking about this, I don't, like every other day I visit a new web page, and then as soon as I put in my new username and password, they'll have a little thing where I have to agree to the terms and conditions, and I check a box or something to be able to use that website or something. I would love to make our students accept a terms and conditions somewhere that says that they're going to do those things, because I can't tell you how many teachers I talked to this year that said, coming back from COVID, these kids just didn't care. They didn't think they had to do anything. They just thought that because they got a free pass last year, they were going to get another free pass this year. But if we somehow through technology could say that the terms and conditions of being able to use whatever the student email this year is that you understand your responsibilities as a student, and so click this button in order to use the student email service this year that says you understand that these are your obligations as a student.
We can do that.
I just think that'd be a really big statement to make.
It would be a pop-up screen.
If I may, Mr. Duncan?
Problem with that is, how many times do you click, I agree to the terms and never read it?
You can make it where you have to at least scroll down to the bottom.
Yeah, we would have to do something.
Especially if it's not that long. This is not long. It's simple. You got to come to school. You got to do your assignments. You're not going to get and in bold print, this is not a free pass school system. I don't care, but something that it seems like it would make a good statement that if at the beginning of the year, when these students try to log into their email for the beginning of the school year, every one of them has to click that they understand that this is what the expectations are to being a student in Tangipahoa Parish schools.
Brett, how many times have you done that scenario that you're talking about, right? Where you go to a new website and you got to click on the button, you have to agree. that you don't read all of it.
Yeah.
That's what I just
You know,
said.
yeah, you don't read all of that. I think that, that what we need is perhaps something, if you're gonna hold students responsible for it, then, then maybe you need to change the forum of orientation, you know, like bring, the seniors into the gymnasium and read these rules to them.
Yeah.
Then get them to sign off on the form. I mean, that way you know that they have actually heard it verbatim, you know?
So what we did last year, Mr. Moore, or I don't know if we did that for, you know, COVID year, but I know that we have done this in previous years, where we actually did our Student Services Department put together a PowerPoint with all of the information from the Student Code of Conduct. And actually, it was pushed out, and part of, on the smart boards, they would go through that on the first couple of days of school. So that's something, certainly, that's just another way that we can help, and teachers would go through each slide, and they would talk about it with the kids. So that's another way to ensure that we're doing orientation with our students as well.
I think that's excellent.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah, my point was not that we shouldn't do those orientations, it's just that if we're not gonna do the sign the form thing, and then we had problems with the sign and get the form back anyway, you know, another way that we should be able to get these students to acknowledge that they understand their responsibilities would be through that electronic signature thing. And you could even do the same thing for the parents when they go to sign into on-course, you know, that, you know, hey,
Yeah.
welcome back to the school year, here's, you know, because it says here, statement of compliance that they agree that they will ensure that their child completes all assignments and all that. But just something where they can understand that they can't just put all of this on. It's not just the school system and the teacher's responsibility to ensure that their student is successful.
Amen.
Absolutely. And I think an additional layer could also be that, you still mentioned pushing out an email to all of the students. You can also add a read receipt for that, for that email.
That'd be great.
So that they could acknowledge that they have gotten it, you know, through that read receipt.
Just any little way where we can signal, hey, this is a team effort. Everybody needs to be on the same page and understand that this is a team effort.
And in addition, you know, the repetitiveness of not just doing that one-time orientation at the beginning of the year, but periodically throughout the year. And schools can get creative in terms of when they bring the boys and girls in, there may be a sign-in sheet where they sign that their presence indicates that they have heard and been exposed to the rules and procedures for the school.
All right, I guess I need to get us back on track. Sorry about that
Okay,
deviation.
So what I was going to say, you're talking about them linking, this is like a 17-page document. So if you're going to do a click, read receipt, maybe we can do a short version, highlight, more information can be found at, and then they'll sign that shorter, and at least they've got the headlines of each one of these sections, because they're not going to read this.
No, the shorter version that I was talking about is right here on the green for students. The
Just the-
statement of compliance will state.
Just the new compliance thing?
No, right here. Student agrees to attend school regularly, arrive at school on time, demonstrate significant effort towards completion of homework, and follows school and classroom rules.
Just a short version of this. Okay.
And if, like you said, if you want more information,
Go
click
to
here.
this.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that, you know, just those to me would be a good thing to get them to sign off on. So,
But they have done the orientations, like you're saying, they bring in the freshmen and the sophomore they do that. Oh, I don't know, like you said last year, but in the past at Poncho High, I know they always did that. You know.
You know,
all right, do we have a motion? I'm
No,
sorry.
sir, we
Yeah,
don't.
I'd like to say just one last thing.
Go ahead.
I agree, Brett, that you're bringing out the standard fundamental behavior that we expect from students. But if you're going to hold them responsible for each one of those items that are listed on that 17-page document, it's kind of hard to hold someone responsible for something if they've not read it, if they don't know what's in it.
That's their obligation to read it. That's the whole point of the, yeah, I mean, and we do hold them responsible for it, whether they click that button or not. Every year, we hold them responsible for the student code of conduct. I'm just pointing out that this would be an extra thing to do to say, hey.
I don't know how in-depth, Mr. Lee, the teachers get when they go through these documents with the orientation in the classrooms. But if they're going page by page and going through that, and I would think that that should be sufficient, you know, so if they're going through that, and it may behoove us, because the more a student knows about the different things that they can get in trouble for, the more conform to it and even share it. You know, a lot of times when there's confrontations and disagreements among students, to be able to tell somebody why what they're doing is wrong, you know, just may help to minimize some of the issues that we're having with our students. But if we know that they've been through it, then it's a whole lot easier to hold them, you know, accountable.
All right, so is there a motion to adopt the proposed revisions to policy JCDA as recommended by the administration?
I'll make a motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez, seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Are there any other additional questions on the proposed revisions? Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll ask members to vote your machines on the motion.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, and thank you all for making the adjustment.
All right, thank you, sir.
Please stick around. Sorry for the rest of the meeting.
That would defeat the purpose. All right, moving back to the top of the agenda, we'll now start abusing Mr. Jinko. Agenda item 1A, consider approval of a new policy, IDA Basic Instructional Program. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Good evening, everyone. The policies that we will review tonight have been sent to us by Forethought, been reviewed by the academic supervisors, the director of academics, the administrative team, and this is what we bring to you tonight, the final compilation of all our work. Basic Instruction Program is a new policy talking about Bulletin 741, which is the Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, basically saying that we're going to follow the policies and procedures that are found within it.
All right. Any questions on the new proposed policy?
Okay,
Mr. Moore?
Yeah, Mr. Jinko, do I interpret it correctly when which, you know, because I noted that the alternative school is included in this basic instructional program. We are including the same coursework in this includes including the exact same coursework for the students who are assigned to the alternative schools.
Yes, sir. Our
Keep them abreast of what's going on in the class.
We have the same expectations for them that we have for our students that are at our traditional schools. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept the new
Motion.
policy.
Motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez to adopt the new policy, seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Are there any additional questions from the board? Is there any public input? Hearing none, ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item is 1B, to consider approval of a new policy, IKDA, dealing with flag displays and the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, sir. This policy will come to you saying that all schools under our jurisdiction will fly the American flag and the Louisiana flag each school day, weather permitting. Talk about the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance, and that when there are any assemblies or meetings, the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag will be played and the singing of the national anthem.
Make a motion to accept.
Motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez, seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons to adopt the new policy. Any additional questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question and ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item is to consider the adoption of a new policy, LDA, Student Teaching and Learning Internships. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. This is just, we're going to work with universities and other alternate certification programs to place individuals that they can complete their certification requirements, and that while those individuals are working with us, they will follow all rules and procedures that our teachers do.
Is there a motion to adopt the new policy?
I'll make that motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Dominguez. Is there any public input? Any questions from the board?
Are we still getting
Mr.
student
Bush?
teachers?
Yes, sir. They're called interns now. Most of them now go a year instead of that one semester that we did.
Yeah, all 3 of them, or whatever, 4.
So they're still using our schools as before?
Yes,
then?
ma'am. We're trying to get as many of our schools as we can.
Any other questions from the board? And no public input. We'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Mr. Jenkins.
Voting is open.
Side question.
And hopefully we'll be able to retain some of these.
Yes, sir. That's, Mr. Moore, that's our focus on getting them here, especially for that group that stays a whole year. It is a great recruiting tool for us
Yes.
to show them the things that we have going on.
Are we gonna be involved in that group that was just voted on? I think Representative Mincy introduced that bill about to see why we have such a teacher shortage, and they created a commission to study that. Anyway, must not know, you looking at me like you haven't.
I
I would love to take a part in that.
Yeah, just a side note, yeah, they just passed, I think, last week, to create a commission to study why we're missing teachers in our state and why our people are not getting the teaching field, and what we can do to correct it. So I'm hoping they contact every school board or parish.
Or maybe we need to
take
take the incentive and reach out
Reach out to them.
and offer our services.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, since we are the 10th biggest, are we the 10th biggest school? I know we're the 10th biggest parish. We're 12th largest school system in the state.
Said Nancy,
I think
Buddy Mincy,
Buddy Mincy's the one that did
he
it
made the,
on the
he
House
made
side.
passed the bill to form the commission.
Yes.
Next item on the agenda is 2A, which is to consider the deletion of policy IDDE dealing with student driver training, a program that we defunded and got rid of a couple years ago.
yes, sir.
Is there any questions from the board on the proposal to delete this policy?
Make a motion to accept the recommendation.
Motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bush. Any other questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
All right, next item is agenda item 3A, which is to consider some proposed revisions to policy ID related to curriculum. Mr. Jinko, these appear to just be minor administrative changes.
Yes, sir. They're changing from custodian to legal guardian.
All right, is there a motion to adopt the
I'll make the
administration's recommendation? Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Dominguez. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
All right, next item is agenda item 3B, to consider proposed revisions to policy IDCA related to summer sessions. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. We're just stating here that students that are coming for leap remediation, that must come for the leap remediation, we are not going to, we cannot and will not charge those students. but our other students for high school trying to gain Carnegie units if necessary, we could.
All right. Is there a motion to adopt the recommendations?
I make a motion.
I'll second.
Motion is made by Mrs. Abrams, seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is 3C, to consider proposed revisions to policy IDDC related to homebound instruction. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. First section is on the criteria for eligibility, that the student shall be free of an infectious or communicable disease. If for some reason they are not, then we would make other provisions such as virtual, et cetera, to get them the instruction they needed. Then there's a section on the back where we're asking for a medical assessment by a physician qualified to make those particular assessments, and then some minor wording changes from must to shall.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
I'll make the motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Bush. Are there any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is 3D, to consider proposed revisions to policy IDDFB related to service animals in schools. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. It's a revised policy that's been expanded to better address some issues and to better control the accommodations for the service animal when it does have to come to campus with the student.
Any questions from the board?
I'll make
Do
the
we have a
motion.
lot of that?
I don't know of any this year, Ms. Sanders. I know in the past, a few years ago, the reason the policy was created, I think there was a student in one of our schools that required a service animal.
Okay, so just like one, maybe.
Yes, again, I'm not aware of any we had this past year.
And Ron, if my memory is correct, we developed a policy because of that
Yes, ma'am.
particular incident. And since then, this is a reflection of forethought, making the,
Catching up and
Yes,
making the
yeah.
changes. Yes, ma'am.
Now, is a service animal just considered a dog, or are we considering any service animal?
My understanding is it could be any service animal that I think a licensed physician says is needed for that particular.
That's
child.
trained for that child?
And there are some qualifications and some different restrictions that the animal has to have before they can come on to, obviously make sure they have all their shots and different things.
And they have to be
But
trained,
the
huh?
parent just can't say, my child needs a service animal, I'm coming with animal X.
Right.
tomorrow."
Well, that's another name for that, Mr. Jenkins. What is that called? When you have the animal and it's not the service animal, it's your emotional support? Is that it?
Yeah, well,
A whole nother group.
this, seems like, I'm not finding it right this minute, but it seems like when I read this, it said that this was well, there it is, defined as a dog that is individually trained to do the work, and then other specific animals, whether wild or domestic, trained or untrained, are not service animals for the purpose of this policy.
That is under number one, under general provision.
Yeah,
as a dog.
yeah, so this is strictly for a dog.
So the motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez to adopt the administration's recommendation. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Any additional questions from the board? Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is 3E, to consider some proposed revisions to IDFAA drug testing of athletes. Mr. Jinko?
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. It's on the last page. It's one paragraph requiring parental consent and release has been added to the current policy.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
Make the motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Dominguez. Any questions from the board?
If a parent doesn't give approval, does that athlete still get to play?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay. Just making sure.
Any other questions? Any public input?
What did she say?
If the parent doesn't give their release, does the athlete get to play?
No.
It'd be like they didn't complete the physical or the other information.
He doesn't get to play if not, okay.
Any other questions? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is 3F, to consider proposed revisions to IDG Adult Education. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. The only change here is the addition of the work ready you as part of the title, which is the new state name for this.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Motion is made by Mr. Bush, seconded by Ms. Dominguez. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is to consider proposed revisions to policy IFDA, Parental Rights, Student Rights of Privacy. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. The change here is in the legal section where they've added the Family Education and Privacy Act name to the references.
It's just a reference addition. So is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
Make
I'll
a motion.
to accept.
A second.
Motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez, seconded by Mrs. Abrams. Is there any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none.
Mr. Jacob, what
Mr.
was
Moore.
the addition? You said it was in, an addition made to the references?
Yes, sir.
On the last page?
The legal reference, the name of it is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act
Okay,
is the legal reference.
okay.
Any other questions? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your devices.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is 3H, to consider some proposed revisions to policy IHA related to grading systems. This is again adding a reference and some minor administrative changes. Mr.
Yes, sir.
Jinko?
The change is just going from 6 to 9 weeks, just making that change
All right.
in our policies.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's
I'll
recommendation?
make the motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there a second?
A second.
Seconded by Mrs. Abrams. Are there any questions from the board?
I have one question,
Mr.
Mr.
Bush.
Jinko. When I looked at this the other day, when we got it, the honor roll classes are different grading scale than the one that's put here. So, or do we need to add that one on there in here too? Or
That is in our pupil progression, that breakdown of the 10-point scale.
okay,
And that's noted in the references also.
got you. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your devices.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
All right, next item is agenda item 3I. Consider proposed revisions to policy IHAE referencing the electronic grade book. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Again, this is just a change from a 6 weeks to a 9 weeks grading period.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's
I make the
recommendation?
motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons.
I'll second that motion.
Seconded by Mr. Bush.
You woke
Any
up.
questions from the
Yay.
board?
Getting excited here at the end.
Heck, let's go, man.
Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your devices.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda, 3J, to consider proposed revisions to policy IHE, promotion and retention. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. This just telling individuals that our promotion and retention policies are followed and are found in our pupil progression policy, and that is the procedures we use to determine when students are promoted or retained.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendations?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Motion made by Mrs. Mingus,
A second.
seconded by Mrs. Abrams. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your devices.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item is agenda item 3K, which is to consider some proposed revisions to policy IKC related to teaching about religion. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Made a few little minor adjustments. The big thing is added an exemption clause. So parents can allow their particular student to be pulled out during that particular time. We'll be having to give some other activity to do. And it says the policy does not exempt a child from satisfying the grade level or graduation requirements in a manner acceptable by the school board.
So, Mr. Jinko, what's the justification for, I mean, the whole rest of this policy is talking about how learning about historic world religions is strictly an academic purpose, the way that we're doing it here in our school system. What would be the purpose of saying that you can exempt your child from this specific academic instruction, but not other types of academic instruction? And then how do we, and what would be the justification for that?
Mr. Duncan, my first thought when we reviewed this is that if a parent has an objection about a particular time in history and it is maybe a religion, they feel that it is more of a religious account of what happened compared to a more factual account, that they would want that their particular student taken out, let's say during that 2 weeks, that we're going to cover the war between X and Y.
Okay.
You're right, this is not specifically saying we're going to teach religion. This is more to take care of those historical parts when we're talking about maybe if religion was involved in that particular war, the parent feels that religion was involved in that particular war.
And how can we justify that, I mean, anybody could say that at any time?
Or just on this religious aspect of it?
But just the religious aspect of it.
I know, but I'm just saying, what if the whole thing was about something that it was a very informative part of history that had a little bit of religion in it? It's part of the lesson, I mean.
And that would be something that maybe our teacher and our administrator would have to show the parent how we're going to teach it. You know, give them a little bit more information about the lesson plans, the information, the resources that we're going to use to teach this, so that we can maybe make a little more informed decision.
So, I mean, I was thinking about this, I'm thinking about what is something comparable that we do. And I do know, like, when we have certain reading assignments where a parent says, hey, I think this is a little too risque. I want a different alternative reading assignment. And under that scenario, we're still teaching reading and comprehension. So I can get that. But to say, well, I don't want my child to learn about, I don't know, a particular world religion that's part of our curriculum, just because I don't like that particular world religion, I worry that sets a precedent. What if I have a parent that says, I don't like, biology. I find that
Dissecting a frog is against what I want to be, too.
it just seems like you're opening up a real trick bag there, and unless we can interpret what you put in here to say, look, if you don't want your child to receive instruction, that's fine, but I'm not going to make my teacher change her test. I'm still testing this material, and we're not going to change the rules of the game just because you don't want your child to learn about whatever. Am I making any sense?
Yes.
I just don't know that. So how do we address that? Is that?
Where did this come from?
This is information that was sent from forethought.
But does it make it a law? Does it make it,
Well,
they send us a lot of stuff that we might not necessarily
Correct.
accept.
No, I believe that the concern is legitimate, and, you have some parents who allow or who are not apprehensive about their children learning about evolution. You either believe that we had a big bang and everything was created from that, or you believe that God spoke it, or whatever some other religion might believe brought us to today.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes down to leaving room for a parent to have some peace about their children being taught something that they're strictly against, I don't know. Maybe there is a legal precedent that needs to be established for it. I think that the addition of this to the policy, is a legitimate, adaptation. I can't make the argument for or against, because it pretty much is a matter of opinion. And I believe that it doesn't hurt to have it there, but I do understand the other side of the argument as well.
It's just super vague too. Because it's religious or moral beliefs. That can be
An opinion.
Yeah, an opinion.
And again, I can, as long as it says, let me just read this again. A parent or person standing in parental relation may remove the parent's child from a class or other school activity that conflicts with that parent's religious or moral beliefs. So that's just basically anything. If the parent believes this, it's just whatever the parent believes, and delivers to the teacher a written statement that they want the child removed. However, that person is not entitled to remove the parent's child from a class or school activity to avoid a test or to prevent the child from taking a subject for an entire semester. So does that mean, okay, you don't want your child to receive my instruction, but they still have to take the test, and I'm not accommodating the fact that, is that how we're interpreting that?
Yeah.
That you were pulled out from the 2 weeks where we talked about X or Y.
Yeah, okay.
I was just going to say, on the first page, we already have it in our policy that, like the first basically sentence, which is a parent or person standing in the parental relation may remove the parent's child from class or other school activity that conflicts with the parent's religious or moral beliefs if the parent presents and delivers to the teacher of the parent's child a written statement authorizing the removal of the child from the class or other activity. And so it strikes that out, but it adds on the second page, however, basically that, it can't be for the entire semester, and there's some exceptions, I guess, to the thing. This policy does not exempt a child from satisfying the grade level requirements or graduation requirements that's required by the school board. So
Basically, it's been there all along, we're just adding to it.
yeah, it looks like to me that it's striking that out and putting some with the exceptions of, however, that whole second half, you can't remove them from a class or other school activity to avoid a test.
But do they still take the test on religion that they missed?
It says you can't pull them to avoid a test or to prevent the child from taking a subject for the entire semester. So you can't say, well, I want to pull my child from this class for the semester, or I don't want my child to take that test.
But if he's out of there for that religious class, and he's still got to take the test, right? Regardless.
That's what it says.
Well, he's going to fail it because he's not going to
Yeah.
be there for the instructions.
Because he wasn't there for it, but you can't remove him for a test. He has to take it.
So if they're teaching X, Y, and Z for the next 2 weeks, I want to pull my child out, and then when it's time for the test, I send him back. But he's not going to pass it because he wasn't there for the 2 weeks. So basically, he's going to get a 0 on that test one way or the other. Unless he's just smart and he's getting,
I can't disagree with that as far as if I'm not there to learn the material, I'm not going to do very well on the test.
right.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I take, it's broad, it's broad. It could be applied to not just a study of religion, but it could be applied to any science course as well.
Well, it doesn't seem like we can leave it like this. I mean,
If you'd like to pull it, maybe we can clean it up and straighten it up a little bit to bring it back and see if our.
We need to, because it's going to come up, it's going to happen, something like this.
Well, it's in
if it
our
hadn't
policy
already.
now.
I'm sure.
And it's just saying, but however, these things can't happen, which, you keep them out for the test or the semester.
Well,
Which
with the policy written as is, without the changes, what kind of issues have come up based on the policy?
Knock on wood, I have not received any calls related to
Right.
this. If the schools are handling it, they're handling it without any issues being brought up here.
Okay, so it would be practical to assume that we're not gonna have any in the future making the change.
Your list of guys here.
All right,
I'm just looking at, so historically, this thing was first adopted back in '94, which I think was when y'all brought the Bible class, that Bible text. That they
Or
were
was
doing.
it the creationism versus evolution that
Evolution,
went to
yeah.
Supreme Court?
Well, I think that was where they did the revision. That's what I was thinking is, I remember '94 was when I was in school and we started that new Bible curriculum.
Which is not there now.
Which is not there now. And then '05 looks like when some sort of revision adopted, which I think had to do with probably the creationism debate and all of that stuff. And I'm thinking that's when the sentence, I'm thinking that's when maybe the sentence was put in there that you could opt your kid out. But now we're in a whole different place, to me, at least in my mind, where if you just leave it like this, you could open the door up to parents opting their kids out of all kinds of stuff. Just
I mean, if you did, it would have to be a whole lot more specific. It would almost have to be like the discipline.
If you wanted to let them
Policy.
do that, I just don't, I don't know. I mean, my preference would be to adopt all of the strikeouts that are proposed, but then also strike out the exemption from instruction. I mean, I just don't think you get, if we say that it's strictly an academic instruction, which is what the whole rest of this thing is saying, you know, and it's not proselytizing, it's not, you know, any of those other things, then I don't, you know, other than just whatever you would normally allow a parent to do, I think that's what you allow the parent to do. You don't make a special provision that says you get to opt out on, you know, this certain category.
I couldn't hear Jerry real well from down there, but I think he brought up the creationism versus evolution theory. Is
Yeah.
that what you said?
Yes.
And so I know some parents do not believe in, you know, kids being taught evolution. So maybe that's how that all got started, you think?
No, I'm not, and let me make clear, I'm not opposed to evolution being taught, because I think that, you know, my children need to know what it is that is in opposition to what we believe, you know? And, you know, personally, I don't think evolution is possible. But I'm not opposed to it being offered or taught, you know, because I think that knowing, you know, what the opposite opinion about how we got here, you know, is important. You know, you need to know about it so that if someone brings it up, at least you'll have a knowledgeable, you know, resistance to it. So I'm not opposed to it being taught. But I teach my children, you know, okay, learn about it, something to know about. I mean, I don't believe that Superman exists and, you know, a Thor, and I don't, you know, but I love watching those movies. It's very entertaining. But I teach my children one way, but I do also sympathize with those parents who don't want their children instructed. I do.
Okay, so, Mr. Duncan, we didn't have a motion, so I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to accept the strikeouts and the strikeouts in the middle, where it says has been ruled, and also to the U.S. Constitution, those additions of green, but not the last exemption from instruction paragraph, but accept all the strikeouts
Motion
as
is
accepted.
made by Mrs. Dominguez to amend the proposed revisions as outlined. Is there a second to her motion?
So in other words, she's saying, but they still have to take the test. Is that what?
She's saying that we're just making these general, she's saying that you're adopting the red policy but striking out the green section that talks about exemption from instruction.
Right, that's what I said, yeah. Okay.
So is there a second to Mr. Dominguez's motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bush. Is there any other discussion, or is there any discussion on Mr. Dominguez's motion?
I would like to see this, tabled. I would like to make a motion to table it and let Mr. Jinkle go back and let them rethink it, and then we bring it back at a later date. I would like time to think about this more myself, you know, and I would like to hear a different, I would like to see a different rendition of what it is that we're trying to adopt here.
Motion to table by Mr. Moore. Is there a second? All right. Without a second, the motion to table fails. Is there any other discussion on Ms. Dominguez's motion to amend?
So we're keeping the red part, a parent and a person staying in the
No,
house.
we're accepting that scratch out.
We're accepting that scratch out. Okay, so a parent does not have a choice to pull their child out of a class.
Right.
Is that what we're saying?
Well, I don't think it necessarily says that. So here's my position on that, Ms. Avery. If, as a parent, if there's something going on in my child's class that I don't feel like I want them to participate in as far as instruction is concerned, then I can handle that. I don't need permission from the school board in a policy to tell me that what instruction I want my child to participate in. I don't need that. What I worry about is setting this precedent that saying that we're going to offer a special exemption when it comes to things that deal with religious instruction.
So if they want to pull their child on their own, they can, but we're not giving them any special extension where they can just take them out for a certain period of time and then bring them back. That's what we're basically voting on.
And we're not adjusting the test.
Exactly.
But we're not going to do anything special for instructions related to history, culture, literature, music, drama, and art, where we talk about a specific exemption when we don't talk about specific exemptions related to math, science, or other things. I mean, I don't know, that's kind of where my brain's coming in. But of course, that doesn't impinge my right as a parent to determine what I'm going to have my child participate in.
But then if we
Then what would
scratch
be the
it,
alternative?
if we scratch it, then you can't take your child out.
Yes, you can, that's your prerogative.
And that's
As a parent.
As a parent, you can, like, that's what he's saying.
That's my question. Then what would be the alternative to that? If that parent does not have the same acceptance as you do?
Well, but that's not outlined in this policy either.
Yeah. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, but the alternative is you work that out with your child's teacher to the degree that you can.
But that should be in writing, huh? Should we rework it?
I don't know why,
It's worked for me because I'm not a Halloween fan at all. And if there's something going on in my class about Halloween and I knew it, I wrote to the little teacher a note. It was simple. My girls got out of it. It wasn't a test on it, but it's still something I was strongly didn't want to participate in. So I don't think, I'm like Mr. Duncan, I don't think it need to be written down. I think if the parents have rights. So we're here to vote on roses.
What does it leave a child if the parent doesn't want that child in that class when it comes down to time to take a test? I think that
it
is,
leaves them in the same
that's what we-
place
yeah.
where the parent makes the decision for them not to participate in that instruction, but if the teacher has created a test on that topic, they still have to take the test. But it's the same place.
You mean with
So
roses?
even if that goes against that child's religion, I mean, they still have to take a test on something that goes against their religion?
That's
If
what
we
the-
add that paragraph that I'm trying to take out,
That's what the,
I'm trying to not put that paragraph.
I see. So what would be the solution? What would be the resolve?
the policy would simply state what's in the black portion. Our policy, as adopted by the board, is simply a statement of what our intention is when when you deal with the instruction, any instruction related to religion, which is that the inclusion of religion in the study of history, culture, literature, music, drama, and art is essential to a full and fair presentation of the curriculum. The inclusion of religious elements is appropriate as long as the material included is intrinsic in the field of study in which it's being presented, and as long as it is presented objectively, etc. It's just stating that this is our intention, is that if a teacher or the administration is going to include some religious element in their instruction, that it needs to meet those criteria.
So with the change that Rose mentioned, again, spell that out one more time.
It's just striking, we're keeping the proposed strikeouts, which is red, but we're not going to include the new sentence related to exemption from instruction.
I got it.
All right, so Ms. Dominguez made a motion. Who second?
It was seconded by Mr. Bush, I believe. All right. Are there any other questions from the board on the amendment? All right. Is there any public input on the amendment? Hearing none, we'll call the question just on the amendment made by Ms. Dominguez.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes with Mr. Moore voting no.
All right, so then the next motion would be to adopt the proposed revisions as amended.
Oh, okay.
Is there such an amendment, such a motion?
Thought I did that.
I'll make a motion to accept the approved amendments, approved policy as
The
amended.
proposed policy as amended. So motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez to adopt the administration's recommendations as amended. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Abrams. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your devices.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes with Mr. Moore voting no.
All right, next item on the agenda is agenda item 3.
L.
Yeah, stop making my check marks. L, which is to consider proposed revisions to policy IKDB related to graduation exercises.
And a few minor revisions. If a student was to graduate at midterm, in order to participate at the end of the year graduation performance, we want them to come practice. And if for some reason a student could not participate in the graduation ceremony, that they would receive their diploma. We've made a change from in private compared to by making.
All right, is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
I'll make that motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there a second?
Second.
By Ms. Dominguez. Any questions from the board?
One quick question, Mr. Jenkins, have we fixed the graduation situation we had last year with that exchange student? And we discussed that yet?
We have not, but it is in policy, and it is part of the agreement that the family had with the organization that brought them over that they could not participate.
Okay. Are we gonna do anything about that, or are we gonna leave it just like it is? I'm just curious.
The issue with the organization,
Right,
they were not allowed to.
Thank you.
As part of their agreement to come over.
I got you. I understand now.
Any other questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your devices.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is 3M, to consider proposed revisions to policy IKI related to lesson plans. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. The change is to remove the reference to the 2008-2009 school year, and that the lesson plan program will be approved by the superintendent and or designee.
All right, is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
I'll make a motion.
Motion is made by Mrs. Abrams,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your devices.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Jinko, are we finished with our full-on review of our policy manual, or do we still have another section coming?
No, sir, I think we have a section or portion of a section at least, right, Ms. Jenkins? Yes. Well, I know we have F, and I know we have some personnel stuff that we have to bring back to the board that was full.
Okay, but like not another whole section, like,
No, we have about 25 more to finish the manual, and then we,
Not that she's keeping
Go
count,
back.
but she knows
Yeah.
it's 25 more.
25? Okay. All right, well, there being no other business to come before the committee at this time, this meeting is adjourned.